Thank you for attending this talk. I will first tell you about the motivation, why I came to this correlation of speculative execution attacks and confidential computing. Then I will also tell you a bit about confidential computing, what is it all about, and why could it be that why can one be that confident that with confidential computing it should be really secure, all your data, and then we will go into the approaches of the speculative attacks and which was used and why they can be used. And finally we get into the exploits or the proof of concepts, crafted one which did not work with or does not work with nowadays kernels, and one which does work. So who am I? I'm a security engineer at Switch, doing malware analysis, phishing kit analysis. I'm operating our MISP instances. I'm also proactive in OT security. So the motivation was one evening I read a paper from Kaveh Ravasi and Johannes Wigner, which inspired me for that. And without their work, it wouldn't be possible for me to have crafted that POC. So thanks them. I was then thinking what vulnerability of a CPU Spectre attack or where could be this disappearing in a real-world scenario which is public-facing, which is easily accessible, and where it has also a large impact, like, for example, for governments which are also using that thing. And of course, it is there where you have like shared CPUs. You have shared CPUs in public clouds, and you have also in public clouds the feature confidential computing. So this makes it even worse. So the answer was confidential computing, and so I thought maybe I could use such new approaches to really exploit something like that. And I looked then into the technology confidential computing at all, how it is working, how it could be abused, and so on. But what is even confidential computing? So confidential computing, there is a nice definition here. I will tell you about a bit differently. So it's data is encrypted in rest and transit, so it will be only decrypted within the CPU from a dedicated coprocessor, which is decrypting the instruction and data, which is delivered in the CPU with a dedicated storage chip. And this makes then key derivations, so the keys never leaving the storage chip, and the coprocessor is decrypting in a so-called TEE, trusted execution environment, the instruction within the data within the CPU, give it over to the main processor, which processes then the instruction and may give back, for example, if it was a calculation or a memory load or whatever, the data in a victim controllable address space, so the victim can use it. So why we are even using confidential computing in public clouds, why we don't trust just Google, Amazon, AWS and so on, okay, because they are Google, Amazon, and AWS, but what else reasons are there for not trusting them? There are concrete points, and I listed a few of them. One is, for example, they could run malicious hypervisors and doing then memory replay attacks, memory aliasing events, event injections, and many more things with that. They could also run malicious guests, so masquerade as another guest which you may want to communicate with you, which you want to give certain access rights to it, and this can then maybe lead to unauthorized memory access. You can do the same with host applications, so a higher level there, but it's the same principle. You can also install malicious devices. So if you use Linux, you can you have then maybe embed your device on the /dev and give them, depending on the access rights, you give it direct memory access or something like that. You have also the possibility to misconfigure the platform unintentionally or intentionally. So yeah, with insecure platform configurations. Or you can also launch intentionally with incorrect or altered golden images, so that per default your installation you make, even if you harden your device and so on, is compromised. So how could one now detect if confidential computing is even available? One can just do it if it's a NIX-based system with LSCPU, and one has to look for my mouse. One has to look for these flags, so SEV, SEV-ES, and SEV-SNP. There is the possibility, if you are using an old CPU, that SEV-SNP is not present there. This is called confidential computing light, so it has no verification environment on its trusted execution environment, but it's also like a form of confidential computing. You see the flags down here. Yeah. Good. Now, CPU Spectre attacks. So, there are many different approaches of abusing the speculations. But first of all, what is a speculation? Why are they even used? So, CPUs have to be highly performant. Therefore, one wants to get rid of most clock cycles used for overhead. A big overhead is the context switching. So if you switch from one function block to another, and you have to overgive or overwrite all the registers, you may have to load some things from memory and so on. You need lots of cycles or CPU cycles. And therefore, what are you doing, or what are the manufacturers doing? They are pre-executing a jump back before you reach a return in a function block. So they already loading and writing the registers. They are loading memory stuff. They are preparing everything for being then executed. And when you are there, you just perform the return, and you have one cycle instead of approximately 7 or 8 clock cycles. So you are much faster. And of course, this can then be by an attacker abused if no countermeasures are deployed. And one of the easiest one is the RSP you see there. The RSP is just can be abused by poisoning the RSP, so the buffer, by the attacker. The attacker is then filling up this RSP with some attacker controllable space addresses of maybe an attacker controlled gadget there, and the victim is then, if it's not sanitized by, for example, the kernel, just jumping into this attacker controlled gadget back and not in its original origin function block he is coming from. So this is the whole magic there. There are, of course, also different approaches. For example, the indirect branch target injection, where the transient, where one trains indirect branches to speculatively jump into attacker-chosen targets. There is also the speculative data leakage, which is then doing the same thing but going over cache. There are many more also documented in the paper linked at the end of the slide set, so you can look it up in more detail if you're interested in. And then there is also the PBRSBA poisoning approach. This is that approach I implemented, which is working on nowadays kernels. So I explain it here in a bit more detail. If you have this RSP buffer, and it will get underflowed. So that means if you have, for example, a glibc function call, which is very nested, so it has many transitions to different function blocks. it at some point underflows, so it has not enough space in the stack to lay in your function block addresses you jump from. And when this case happens, so when it underflows, it has like a backup. I say it in quotes table. It's not a table, but a backup table where you lay down your addresses, and this is the RRSPA. And an attacker could maybe also poison that. And if then an intended underflow is triggered by calling, for example, a libc function, and the poisoned RRSPA is there, the victim again jumps into an attacker-controlled gadget. So, my first implementation, as I told you, was the RSB exploit. So I was very happy. I've done it. I was then giving it to Kaveh Ravasi for a review, and he told me then, yeah, it looks good, but isn't that already mitigated by the Linux kernel? And I was, no, okay. All the work for nothing, very good. So my weekend plan was cancelled, and I implemented the PBRRSPA. But how is it then mitigated? It is just mitigated by the Linux kernel by RSB filling. So each time you make a context switch, so each time the attacker has the possibility to poison this buffer, it will get flushed. So if one makes a context switch back to the victim, it is already flushed, and your poisoned or your filled RSB is not filled anymore any longer. So this is not working anymore. Then there are different more mitigations. It's not only this RSB mitigation. It's also, for example, user to kernel land transitions with SMAP. Block speculation, use of targets in kernel. This is branch history clearing, and this is controlled via policy. Then there is also red bleed, SRSO, reduce of dependence of the RSB state. It goes in the same direction. Then there are also layered defenses, which fascinated me, because it's a combination of multiple defenses and is, of course, CPU and policy dependent. So now, which CPU model and kernel versions are affected to the respective POC? This is, of course, very important to understand. As more low level you go, as more specific it gets. So it's not working on every CPU family. So it's working on Intel here. It's not working on every CPU architecture. It's working on Golden Raptor and Golden Cove and Raptor architectures. It's also not working on every operating systems. It's working on Linux, and it's also not working on every Linux kernel versions. Oh, very nice. Cool message here. I have two. Okay. So, okay. Yeah. And this RSB poisoning attack is, was really long, mitigated. I just did not really, read good enough the kernel.org documentation. Shame on me. So again, read the fucking manual, approach, which wasn't done correctly. It's, mitigated, till kernel version 4.15, so release January 2018, so 7 years ago, or soon 8 years ago. And yes, then I want to get back to the, okay, perfect. And then there is the PBRRSPA. This works for kernel, all kernels, Linux kernels lower than 6.9. This is the release date May 2024. And with nowadays kernels, if the IA32 spec control RRSPA this U and this S flags are not set, so a special configuration. Now, how to detect if the current setup is vulnerable? You can just type in this little command here, and you get a hexadecimal value here, in this case 191. We will go into that in after I told you about this second command. The second command here is used for detection if the RRSPA control is even advertised. If it is not advertised, it can have two meanings. Meaning one is the CPU architecture is not even supporting confidential computing, and therefore, because this feature is not even there in the CPU, it will also not get advertised. The second meaning is the CPU supports confidential computing, but it just does not advertise these flags. So even if the flags are set here in this binary, then binary string, it is still vulnerable because it will not get advertised. So these are the two meanings. And now if we just bring that into binary form here, we see that only the bits 5 and 6 are here for us relevant. The other ones just for having them as a documentation. I listed them here, but 5 and 6 are here set to 0, so it's vulnerable. Even if they are set to 1, it would be vulnerable because it is not advertised. So the exploits, now the flash on the whole thing. The first exploit I will is not working, of course, with the current or nowadays kernel, but have many elements I've just taken from that one and brought it to the new one. So I will explain you that. So first of all, we have like standard assembly structure here with the sections, and so we are doing here an allocation of a probe buffer with a page size of 4096 bits and 256 pages. This is an allocation and it's uninitialized. This is very important. We will see it later. Then we have the starting point where we just load in the RCX register the integer value 32. These are like the number of iterations we will do for poisoning. Then we have the RSP filler. We are just falling through to this function block, and we are calling the poisoning function block. And in the poisoning function block, we are just calculating the absolute address of the leak gadget. We are loading it into the RAX register, and we're pushing it down for doing the poisoning of the RSP. Then we are jumping back. And with the loop, we are decrementing our counter. We are checking if the value is 0 or not, and we are jumping back then to the RSP filler if it's not a non-zero value. Of course, the first time it's non-zero, we again do the poisoning. We do that 32 times, and as soon as it is 0, it will fall through. This would have to have a spin function, but I let it here away because of the reason that it wouldn't fit on the slide. The leak gadget is very important because it's one-to-one the same in the exploit working nowadays. So what I did here is if the victim is then falling to our leak gadget, we are just loading 1 byte of the first parameter transmitted to this function block to the lower bytes of the RAX. This AL means the lower byte of the RAX register. We are shifting it with 12 to the left. This is an equal operation to multiplicate it with 4096. We will see that on the next slide why we are doing that. And then we are just zeroing this base address of the probe buffer with the offset of the previously calculated byte value we want to exfiltrate, and we are zeroing this page. So why does that now work? Why is that valuable for us? I painted a bit in LaTeX. It was very painful to do that like that. I wouldn't recommend you. If we take, get a secret from this first parameter, just as an example value, it's 74 because it's a cool number. And this would be in hexadecimal for A. Then we are shifting this with 4096, so we multiply it with 4096. We got this result, or it's equal to 4A and then 3 zeros. And then we are just using a base address of the probe buffer. This is here for simplicity reasons, 0x1 and then 7 O's, because it's a 32-bit system assumed. And then we are like adding this up and get the actual address. What are we doing now? Because we have here, this is one page and this is the next page and so on, 4096 bits in each page, we have to touch the right page, I would say, we have to navigate 74 times a page. So we have to navigate 74 times 4096 to the right. So what we are doing is we are with this operation we are going not 1, not 2, not 3, but 74, and it's not accurate. It's just an illustration. It has not 74 pages here in the picture. We are navigating 74 pages to here, and then we are zeroing that. You remember maybe at the beginning I mentioned that it is not it is not initialized. So in these pages there are not 0 bytes. There are just garbage, just some bytes left from previous from previous allocations. So therefore, if we then later as an attacker just do the fastest hit scan, we see, okay, this page is not 0, okay, this page is not 0, and so on, until we reach here, and we see this is completely 0. So we have, because we're iterating through every page, then when arriving here, the offset of 74, and know, okay, this is just set to 0, and therefore it has to be 74, which was exfiltrated as the secret byte. So that's the basic idea. And now, how does it work in the, also drawn in LaTeX, very much pain. And now, how does it work with the, in the POC, which is actually working? So, we are triggering the glibc IO stack, function, which is, then underflowing the RSB. In parallel, the attacker is doing this, train and flush of the RRSPA, and this is then a shared cache for the victim and the attacker. As soon as the victim wants to perform the speculation and recognizes that it isn't possible to use the RSB because it's underflowing, he's using the RRSPA, and therefore mispredict and make the trains and jump into the attacker-controlled gadget, makes again the same thing like I told you before, touches this page, and the attacker can then have a look at the offset and gets the secret byte. So how does that now look in real life? It looks like that. Again, we have this allocation already told, but we are loading 64 as an integer value, not 32. So it's a bit more. We need a bit more call and return pairs for poisoning that, and for poisoning this. This RRSPA backup table, I would say. Then we are just falling through to the train loop. We are calling our train gadget. The train gadget is doing exactly the same. It's calculating the absolute address. It's laying it down to the or loading it to the RAX register. It's pushing it down. It's doing it 64 times. It's also here again decrementing it, the counter. It is checking for null, 0 values, and it's then going back to the train loop function block marker. As soon as it's over and it's reached the 0 value, it's falling through to the spin. And what is now here special? At the spin, I was firstly falling into just doing a spin and then the jump to the spin. This is of course very consuming of power of resources. So if you have like detection measures for the CPU thresholds maybe of CPU usage, then you may get detected if you do it like without the pause, because it's just spinning. But if you like embed here this little line, you will just have a bit latency and not jumping right back, and you will circumvent the detection. This spin will take the thread alive, and it will also take the probe buffer also the thread alive for the attacker's gadget, and of course also the probe buffer. So you need to have this spin, otherwise it will be killed by the kernel. Yeah, and as soon as the victim is then using this poisoned RRSPA buffer, it will exfiltrate like seen in the previous slide, the secret byte, and we have successfully not only used this CPU Spectre attack or implemented the CPU Spectre attack methodology, but also broken confidential computing, because even though it is encrypted in rest and transit, it will be jump from the CPU to not the victim controllable address space, but to, at the end, the attacker controllable address space. And this is all from my side. Thank you very much for the attention.
Thank you very much, Kaya, for your great presentation. Anybody want to ask something to Kaya? No. Nobody. Here, you'll be the next one, sorry. There's another question.
So you say that these attacks works on SEV and TDX respectively for Intel, right?
Sorry, I did not understand you.
It works on AMD SEV and Intel TDX.
No. It only works, it does not work for AMD.
Okay.
It just works for Intel Raptor and Golden Cove architectures.
But shouldn't this have patched via microcode update? Why was it patched by the kernel?
It is patched by the kernel. If you have the configuration with the advertised bits set to 1, it's nowadays not vulnerable anymore. But if it's not advertised, or if it's set to 0, then it's still vulnerable today. So it depends on the configuration.
Okay, thanks.
Please, you can go on.
Yep. Thanks for the talk. It was pretty impressive. I was wondering, since you are working for Switch, whether that's the kind of research that then you apply to your own data centers.
Sorry, I still did not understand. Can you repeat it?
Yep. Since you're working for Switch,
yeah.
Are those kind of research applied also to your data centers?
I see. Okay, I see the point. Not directly. I just gave internal this talk at Switch, so the people should know about it. But I'm not working directly for our data centers or internal infrastructure. I'm working for our banking and OT customers. This is where my team is focused on. And of course, for banking fields which are using maybe public cloud and also confidential computing within, it's very relevant.
There's another question on your left, Kaya.
Thanks, Kaya, for the talk. So some systems cannot be patched or the configuration can't be changed when they are a bit too critical and we're scared to do any kind of update on them. Is there a method, anyway, on detect such type of attacks without changing the configuration?
Yeah, of course. It's depending how it is implemented. If it's like implemented it's very difficult to answer that question. If you do you assume, maybe a question back, because it's depending, my answer is depending on that. Do you assume that it's happening on a public cloud environment of, for example, Azure? Or
yes.
Okay. If you assume that it's depending on a public cloud infrastructure you are not controlling, you wouldn't be able to detect it. You will just be able to identify that it's vulnerable, but it's like the public cloud provider which would be able to detect it, because you cannot control this hypervisor level stuff, and therefore you cannot also not log it. Yeah, I would say it like that. What the only thing is, how it could be maybe detected, is if you have then, if you have like a result you are awaiting and you have a miss, so you don't get this result back, and this multiple times, this can maybe lead to suspicious activity, and you may then investigate further and find that out in this way, but you don't have really a direct way to detect it. I would say it like that. Does that, I don't see you, but does that answer your question?
Yes, thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you. Is there maybe a last question? Here back in the center.
Thank you very much. Very interesting talk. I do get that when you can exfiltrate like 1 byte, then the promise of confidential computing doesn't uphold anymore. But how practical do you consider attacks, or how would a practical attack look like? What would you be able to exfiltrate, or how long would it take, or how much time you would have to spend or something like that? So what would be the more practical aspect of that?
Mm-hmm. I of course not tested that, so I will not. I cannot give you like a really good answer to that. But I guess if you want to like exfiltrate data, it depends on what you want to exfiltrate. Is it, for example, like an audio stream? You are maybe on a telephone server or streaming or something like that. Is it like a statistical text file, or is it a PDF file or whatever? And then, of course, if it's, for example, an audio stream, you have like to stream that value through. You have to like bring that in a socket, maybe a socket-based file, to transmit it back via some channel to exfiltrate it to a fetching station or something like that, and then you have like to reconstruct the audio transmission or something like that. But depending on what you want to exfiltrate and how big the data is, you have, of course, you can of course not use the gadget I used just for probing then which counter fits the byte value, but you have to have other data structures involved to get an exfiltration done. Is that somehow working? Okay, cool.
Okay, we're reaching the end. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks for your presentation.